There are nearly 20,000 murders annually in the United States.
Perhaps it's the weather, but the Pacific Northwest has become the notorious home of serial killers and bizarre crimes.
We're here to discuss those murders,
To try to understand the motives,
respect and remember the victims.
and explore the humanity of it all.
I'm Emily Rowney.
And I'm Alisha Holland.
And this is Murder in the Rain. While the Portland I remember of the 1980s was a magical land full of OMSI visits, guest appearances on the Ramblin' Rod Show, and a treasured adventure to see a beloved astronaut speak at Portland State University, some folks a little bit older than I might possibly remember the Portland of the 1980s to be a little bit seedier. Quick overview of the 1980s version of PDX. The decade kicked off with a literal explosion, the eruption of Washington's Mount St. Helens in 1980. There were skinheads trolling the streets, making people of color feel as if any day could be their last. The Rajneesh cult relocated to call Oregon home. And let's not forget that the Black civil rights advocates were still fighting for schools and bus routes to desegregate appropriately in the early 80s. Let's just let that sink in. Now, the 80s music scene in Portland was poppin'. From traditional jazz to punk, we had it all. Clubs were opening up all over the city, bringing in famous acts from every corner of the U.S., as well as giving an outlet to the young budding musicians local to the area who typically practice in their mom's garage. One of the budding lucrative clubs on the scene was the Starry Night, located in downtown Portland. The Starry Night occupied a building that was originally built in 1922 as a church, but in 1982 it was given new life. After nearly a decade of business, the club was sold and renamed the Roseland Theater. While still a staple of the Portland music scene, not many people know the origin story of this hip little venue. They buy their tickets to the Pixies or the Donnas or, God help them, Tech Nine, and not once stop to think about the darker side of what happened in that building 3 decades ago. The Starry Night Club was owned by Larry Hurwitz. Larry Hurwitz was an established guy in the 80s. This guy was the epitome of music culture. He had flashy clothes, money, a way with words, and a music club to call his own. He had it all, including a rap sheet that was pretty long and even up to this past summer grew longer. The rumors of what he has been involved in is startling. Arson, drugs, bombings, money laundering, theft, kidnapping, and most disturbing, murder. Jim Redden, an investigative reporter, has spent a large portion of his career dedicated to unwrapping the mystery of Larry and his contributions to the dark side of Portland. Jim started his career in the mid-80s, working in politics at the Oregon legislature and then City Hall. After a short stint in this, he decided to move to the Willamette Week to be a journalist, where he had the opportunity to report on legislature for a few years. When he started to get burnt out on politics, an opportunity to work on something new was offered to him. Jim was kind enough to spend a couple of hours with the Murder in the Rain crew to share his perspective on a case known as the Starry Night murder.
So I did politics for a few years at Willamette Week, and then once again I got burned out on that.
Mm-hmm.
Politics just wasn't fun. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as it is now, but it was, it was getting very personal, very partisan, and just not very enjoyable anymore. So I wanted to do something else.
Okay.
Mark Zussman was the editor, still is the editor there. And I went to him and told him I was, tired of politics. I want to do something different. And he said, "What?" I hadn't really thought about it.
What do I want to do?
So he said, think about it and tell me. This was the mid 1980s. I was going to rock and roll clubs because I always liked rock and roll music. And when I moved to Portland, it was great to have a real music scene.
Guessing a little more liberal than what you're used to in
all
Medford.
That stuff, and it was a lot of fun to see. Kind of those kind of audiences and the music and things like that. And Miami Vice was the most popular show on TV at the time, and so I said I want to write about drugs. Went back to him and said I want to write about drugs and drug dealers. And he said, "Oh, great. And here's a story that another reporter had done. It's a great topic." And he had me read the story that had been published before I went to work there, and it was about a drug-related murder that happened here in Portland, where like three yuppies had gotten together and begun dealing cocaine, and then something went wrong. They had a falling out, and two of them killed the other one, and they tried to dispose of his body by burning it in a boiler at the Alpenrose Dairy.
Oh boy!
But it didn't burn all up, and they got caught and charged and went to trial and convicted. And that was the story of the murder and the trial and the conviction.
Wow.
And I said, well, that was a really well written story, but that case is over. I mean, it was all done. I mean, what I want to do is I want to write about drug dealers before they get arrested. I want to name the drug dealers.
So you know who they are. You got your eyes on them
before they get arrested. He said, "Okay, give it a try."
So how do you go about doing that? Are you looking to buy drugs to suss them out?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not talking about small time drug
okay,
dealers.
like
The
big
street level dealers or
Gotcha.
all of that stuff, and who's their boss and who's the boss above them. The Miami Vice level drug dealers.
I hope they dress like that too. While working the drugs beat during his time at Willamette Week, Jim reported on a story about a restaurant investor named Richard Ness. Ness was suspected of dealing cocaine and using the drug money to invest in local businesses. When one restaurant eventually went out of business, there were rumors that it was because one of his drug mules had been busted. In the course of interviewing musicians, employees, club owners, and drug dealers regarding the cocaine sales in the Ness case, many people questioned why Jim was spending so much of his time working on this case when there were bigger cocaine-dealing nightclub owners just down the street. Enter one Larry Hurwitz of the Starry Night Club.
But in the course of doing that reporting, just many people I talked to said, well, yes, he's a drug dealer, but why are you writing about him? Why aren't you writing about Larry Hurwitz? And that's where people first started bringing up Hurwitz's name to me.
What were they saying? What were you hearing?
Everybody knows that Larry is a much bigger drug dealer than anybody else in town.
So right away he was connected with drugs.
Right away they're bringing this up, and I'm saying, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm familiar with Starry Night, go to a lot of shows there. I've seen Larry on stage.
What was it like? Describe the ambiance to me of Starry Night.
It's a great big concert hall. Well, it's a mid-sized concert hall,
right.
but it's big for a club.
Has
open floor.
Has it changed much?
Not much, because there's not much you
I've
can really do
definitely
with it.
been there, in recent years.
It's got a balcony up on the second floor that goes around 3/4 of the way and is open at the stage end, of course.
Right.
It had been a church, a tabernacle with, lots of people and singing and things like that. Larry had remodeled it, painted the interior black, so it was very dark.
Okay.
Very hard to see how many people were actually in the club at any given time, or how hard to count them anyway, because there was no single space you could stand and count everybody, which is part of why he was getting away with what he got away with for a while. But people were telling me just fantastic stories. They were saying, like, I was down in the basement one day, and these three men in suits came in with suitcases and opened them up, and those full of cash.
Whoa.
And large amounts of cocaine were moving through the club. And the stories at the time just seemed too much. I mean, it was much bigger than, anything that I'd heard anyplace else. The club was in business. He hadn't been arrested for anything. And I just kind of thought, maybe these people are just jealous.
Right.
He's the big guy in town.
Making lots of money.
Were
these primarily people who worked with him, or just had been in the area, his competitors? Who was actually
everybody?
Coming to you? Everybody.
Once again, the stories were at that time, really hard to believe.
Right.
Richard Ness was a small club that he'd been financing. People saw him doing really stupid things. Nobody said, oh, yeah, and then somebody came in with a briefcase full of cash and put it on the table, things like that. But that's, I was focused on the Ness story, started to hear about Larry, and so that's how he really first got on my radar.
Okay, so you knew who he was, you'd been there.
Someone to think about.
Shortly after first hearing about Larry, a small club on the southeast side of Portland, Pine Street Theater, reached out to Jim with claims that Larry was trying to put them out of business, going as far as suspected arson. While the club was much smaller, they were getting good acts from all around the US, and many people came to their club, making it an enemy of Larry Hurwitz. When's the first time you decided you wanted to write about him?
Well, after the Nest story came out, I can't remember the exact chronology, but sometime around that time, there was another club, Pine Street Theater, in Southeast Portland, and it was a smaller club than Starry Night, but they were getting some national level acts, some of the kind of punk bands that were beginning to come out, Dead Milkmen and groups like that. There was a fire there one night after a show, and I began to hear rumors that the owners thought it was arson. And so I went and I talked to them, and I talked to the fire department, and I can't remember whether we were able to actually establish that it was arson or not, but they believed it was.
Okay.
And they believed that Hurwitz had done it.
And what was their reasoning? Why were they fingering
He
him?
said because Hurwitz had been trying to put them out of business ever since they started by filing complaints with the building bureau,
I see.
saying that they were violating building codes, which they probably were. It was an operation with not a whole lot of money.
Right.
And so I thought, wow, that's playing hardball.
Yeah.
But that gave me the excuse to call Larry and say, I'm doing this story about Pine Street Theater, and in the course of the story, they tell me you've been filing these complaints against them and you're trying to put them out of business. And he admitted it.
Wow.
He didn't deny it. He admitted it.
He did.
He said, I've had to spend a lot of money on Starry Night to comply with building code regulations. And here's a competitor of mine that is not doing that. I have every right
That's valid.
to file a complaint. And, it's on the one hand, it's kind of hard to argue with it. On the other hand, that's, really playing hardball with a much, much smaller company. But I was able to do a story about Larry trying to put Pine Street Theater out of business,
Right.
not about him trying to burn it down.
Right.
He didn't admit that, and I didn't have any proof of it. But now, looking back, I'd say it's certainly
Probably.
possible that he was behind that fire,
Or he told somebody to do it, right?
or had people do it. I believe if it was done, he was there because he was very hands-on in the crimes that were committed out of Starry Night.
Okay.
But that's how that was my first Hurwitz story.
Not long after Jim's first article around Larry Hurwitz and his efforts to put a competitor out of business, he began hearing more and more rumors regarding Larry and the darker things that were going on in his club. Tim Moreau was born on May 3rd, 1968. In 1986, Tim moved from Baton Rouge to Portland to attend Reed College. With brilliant orangey red hair, Tim was hard to miss. Friends and family describe him as a lovable and well-rounded guy. He was in the Boy Scouts as a kid, he played violin for many, many years, and he got great grades. When Tim was younger and shy about dating, he took his mom on practice dates so she could help him learn about dating etiquette before he started asking girls out. Isn't that the cutest
That's
thing?
precious.
A clever and dedicated type of young man, he was accepted into 5 different universities before making his decision to move to Portland to attend Reed College as a philosophy major. One of the things that I read about Tim that I thought was really cute was that after he went to college, he called home to thank his parents for everything they had done for him. Tim can be summarized in a quote that I read, "The kind of son every family wants but never gets." An avid music fan, Tim started a twice-a-week dance club in a local restaurant in 1988. He did that for about a year before being offered a job in ticket sales and promotion at a club called the Starry Night. Assuming this was the way into a career in the music industry, Tim decided to leave college and go work at the Starry Night full-time for Larry Hurwitz. After about a year working for Larry, rumors started to swirl that there were counterfeit tickets being sold for shows at the venue. In fact, in late 1989, the Portland Fire Bureau opened an investigation on the Starry Night. One show in particular caught people's attention, and that was a concert for John Lee Hooker. Something you should know is at this time, someone from the Portland Fire Bureau was actually on site at the venue. And while it was well known the capacity of the venue is about 1,100, they counted 1,500 people for the concert. And they carefully reviewed the tickets, but they all looked legitimate. Tickets for the show had been sold through Ticketmaster, so while the show was at the Starry Night, the sales were shared with the ticket promoter. Any tickets that may have been counterfeit would have gone directly into the pocket of the counterfeiter without having to share those sales with the promoter. This could be pretty lucrative as well as very hard to prove.
You need to understand how this worked, because and it took me a while to figure this out. It sounds so funny that a guy is counterfeiting tickets to shows at his own club.
Place, right?
What's the point in counterfeiting tickets to shows at your club? Well, he wasn't counterfeiting tickets to every show at his club. He was counterfeiting tickets to shows at his club that were booked by other promoters.
Right.
And
so you would have to pay a cut to that promoter, right?
It depends. Each show could be unique. But basically the promoters are renting your hall for a fixed price, or a fixed price and a percent of the ticket sales, or a combination of the two. But whatever it is, there's a cap on the maximum amount of money that you're going to make on that. You can make and keep all the money you can make by selling alcohol and other refreshments. But in terms of the money you're making basically from somebody else's show, there's a cap on that. But what Larry did was counterfeit tickets to shows booked by other promoters at his club, and then would sell those tickets, at Day for Night, his other business, or maybe under the table at Starry Night, and would keep all of that money. He would not split the proceeds with the other promoters, with the promoters.
Right.
And also, if it was a sold-out show, it would seriously overcrowd
and once
the show.
It's standing room only, it's probably hard to tell.
Starry Night had a capacity of, I think, 1,400 people maximum, enforced by the fire marshal.
Right.
But Larry could theoretically sell an additional 300 or more tickets, and all those people would be admitted at the door because they had a ticket. And that's a serious overcrowding problem. And the fire department knew that Starry Night was routinely overcrowded.
They did.
They had a hard time getting a count because of the layout.
Yeah, and there's no seats downstairs.
And they were trying to figure out how this was happening, because they could stand at the door and they'd watch people come in, and everybody had a ticket. The person at the door would take the ticket from them, would tear it in half and give them back part of the ticket so they could come and go, and then take the other part of the ticket, put it in a box right there. The fire marshal could take the lid off the box, look inside, sees what looks like real tickets, and so nobody could figure out how all these other people were getting in.
Larry was quick to point fingers at Tim Moreau and accused the young employee of the entire scam. Most people didn't buy this story. Larry had made quite a few enemies over the years, and they were willing to dish dirt on him. Most people who had worked with Larry or for Larry had their own stories of being ripped off and mistreated by him. One of these people turned to Jim Redden to tell him that they suspected him of the counterfeit scam, and that he would make the counterfeit tickets for shows to cram hundreds of extra people into the venues and pocket the cash.
The counterfeit tickets are found. He blames his promotion manager, Tim Moreau, spontaneously on the spot. There were witnesses there, and I get a call the next day from a musician, Craig Mather, tipping me off that this has happened, and that Larry had accused him.
Why is he tipping you off? What is he
doesn't like Larry.
He doesn't like him. Has something happened between them?
Oh, I'm sure it had. I don't know what I'm sure Mather has played at the club, and everybody that played at Starry Night that was not a big act, Larry
ripped him off.
I heard a lot of stories about a band would be booked to do an opening show. They'd do the set. They'd go down to the dressing room. Larry would be there. Larry'd say, okay, here's your $300. And they'd say, you promised us $500. And Larry would say, take it or leave it.
Yeah. I mean, what are they going
that
to
was
do,
it.
right? You're
Yeah.
a poor musician.
So everybody had stories like that.
Okay.
And so I'm sure that Craig had some kind of a run-in with Larry at some point. And so he called me and told me that these counterfeit tickets were found. Larry blamed Tim, but he doesn't believe, Tim is to blame. He believes that Larry was
it's a bigger
behind
operation.
it.
As Jim investigates the ticket scandal and the happenings at the Starry Night, something serious happens just days after the scandal hits. On January 23rd, 1990, Tim Moreau goes missing. Jim's gut feeling was if something happened to Tim, Larry was involved in it. After all, if anyone knew his secrets, it would be someone that worked with him, someone who just so happens to be the person he blamed for the scandal that would tarnish the reputation of himself and his club.
And then when Tim disappeared just a few days later, then I was immediately suspicious that Larry was involved in it, that Tim didn't merely leave town, that something bad had happened, and that Larry was involved in it.
Jim began investigating Larry Hurwitz because he knew this guy was bad news. Not everyone thought that way, though, which makes it hard to get people on board with you. People were split on Larry and what type of person he was. He was an established man in the 80s music scene in Portland, something that was kind of powerful. And while many folks had bad experiences to share, others were not convinced he was a total douche. This put Jim in an interesting position to begin publishing stories on a unique and complicated individual. People are going to start listening and people are going to start talking. Is public opinion that he's kind of a sleazeball at this point? Are you getting bad vibes from him when you talk to him?
Larry's a complicated character.
Right.
And he did have people that worked for him who, still liked him. I'm told that he could be very charming, that he could be very kind of mesmerizing and could talk people into doing things that weren't necessarily in their best interests, but they didn't understand.
And I'm sure they can
at the
overlook
time.
some things for that music scene and that glamour life.
And when I finally got around to doing my series, the 25 chapter serial for PDXS, I learned that it was being very well read within the local rock scene. And the reason was that people were really split on Larry. There were folks who absolutely believed that he had killed Tim Moreau and that I was justified in writing as extensively about him as I was. And there were people who thought he was completely innocent of that and that I was crazy and persecuting him for reasons that nobody can understand. And they would read the chapters as they came out and then they would argue over them in the clubs and things like that. So, Larry, although I was hearing a lot of bad things about Larry,
They were still good.
people were motivated to tell me bad things about Larry.
Gotcha.
So I never saw the charming side. Every time I talked to Larry, I was doing a story on him and I was trying to get him to admit something that, either he didn't want to admit or he shouldn't have admitted, like, trying to put Pine Street Theater out of business,
Right.
Stuff like that. So I never saw the charming side, but people tell me he could be charming.
As Jim started dedicating much of his work to writing about Larry, his suspicion grew stronger. Jim turned to the Portland police to learn as much as he could about the investigation into Tim's disappearance. This is when Jim meets Detective Steve Baumgart, a homicide detective. From speaking to Steve, he's learned that the police are assuming Tim has been murdered, and they suspected Larry was involved. The reason? The counterfeit tickets. Larry detailed to police that he had confronted Tim regarding the counterfeit tickets, and Tim told him everything, that he produced the tickets himself, he sold them himself, and he had pocketed all the money. But there was still money left. So Larry said that Tim claimed he would hand it all over to Larry, but it was at his house. So Larry follows Tim home in his car to go to his house and get the money. He's never been to the house before, and of course, in the pursuit of following him to the home, he loses him and never sees Tim again. Yeah. Jim also learned this story isn't very believable.
when I decided to go into the story full bore, I called the Portland police and asked to speak to whoever is heading up the investigation into the Moreau's disappearance. And I was put in touch with Detective Steve Baumgart, who was a homicide detective. He wasn't a fraud detective or a counterfeiting detective. He wasn't a missing persons
So
detective.
there's clue number one.
He was a homicide detective, and went into the office and met with him, and he made it very clear immediately that the police suspected that Tim was dead, and that they suspected that Larry had some involvement in it. Larry's story had been that he had paid Tim to buy real tickets for sale at his second business, a nightclub called Day for Night, that Tim had taken it upon himself to counterfeit tickets and had pocketed the cash, that Larry's employees and maybe Larry himself had inadvertently sold counterfeit tickets, and that when he confronted Tim about that, a couple days after the tickets were found, Tim admitted doing that, told Larry that he still had most of the money that Larry had given him back in his apartment, and they could go get it. And this is Larry's story.
Right.
And the two of them left Starry Night late at night, got into their cars, and Larry was following Tim because Larry said he didn't know where Tim lived. And Tim ran a red light and escaped him and drove off into the night.
Okay.
And was never seen again. And so that was the story that Baumgart gave me, which was Larry's story. And I said, "Do you believe that?" And he said, "Larry Hurwitz drives a sports car, and Tim Moreau's car is a piece of shit."
So no.
And that was, so that was the moment when, I thought, okay,
something's
this
going on.
this is the real deal,
Right.
and this calls for a real story.
Now, Tim was the type of guy who spoke to his parents regularly. They were aware that there was some conflict in the relationship with his boss. In fact, in his last phone call that they had with him on January 19th, just around the time of the ticket scandal, he had told them that he was going to ask for a raise and that he had information that was going to help him get it. But then his parents never heard from him again. As I read all of this information, it definitely led me to believe that Tim was likely involved in the ticket scandal, but it's really hard to believe that he was the mastermind. Just how does a kid like him get his hands on the exact paper that Ticketmaster used for the tickets? How does he find buyers? And how does he do that all under his boss's nose? Jim validated this thought. He too believed that Tim might have had some involvement, but that it all would have been under the guidance of Larry himself. So now, you had written that Tim's parents had claimed one of their last conversations with him, he said, "I have something on Hurwitz."
Correct.
Do you think it was the counterfeit tickets? Do you think he had any involvement?
Tim had been a student at Reed College,
Right.
and had come from New Orleans, where his parents lived. Very involved in music, liked music, and started to get involved in the music scene. And took a leave of absence from Reed in order to pursue a career in music, and was offered a job by Larry, which was, the biggest, local club owner in town. So
Right.
what a
It's a big deal to him.
fantastic
Mhm.
opportunity, an older guy who really knows the business. Tim would call his parents frequently,
Mhm.
and in their last conversation, in previous conversation, it was kind of building up to the fact that he was getting dissatisfied with the job.
Not paid a whole lot.
He was only getting like $500 a month,
Right.
whereas Larry, had a lot of money and all of this stuff, and that he was going to have a serious discussion with Larry about being paid more money.
Because he was putting in a lot of work, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of work, and said something that the parents took, I think, as saying, I'll be able to get this raise because I know something about
I
Larry that he doesn't want people to know. Implying that I've got something on him.
Mm-hmm.
But then Tim said, if that doesn't work out, can I move back home? And of course, the parents said yes, and never heard from him again. So I think what Tim had on Larry was that Tim knew Larry was behind this counterfeit ticket scheme.
A few days after the final call between Tim and his parents, Tim's landlady contacted them to say that he went missing and that she has reported it to the police. The same week, Larry Hurwitz also makes a call to Tim's parents to give them his version on what happened with the counterfeit ticket scheme, again telling them that Tim took the money and fled. Tim's parents knew something was wrong. He would never flee, and if he did flee, it would have been home to them. They were convinced that something bad had happened to him. So they jumped on a plane and headed to Portland immediately to search his apartment, talk to his friends, talk to police, and try to find Tim. Thus began a new phase of their life, a life in search of Tim.
And how shady is that to, your boss calls
Oh,
your
yeah.
parents instead of being like, he didn't come to work, so I called and let me know if there's anything. Just like, hey guys, so I know he's missing, but just
Let
want
me
to
give
let
you
you
the
know
story of
my
why.
side of things.
This is why he's missing.
Before,
He knew he was in trouble and he took my money and he ran, and it wasn't even his money.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, he was definitely trying to lay down an alibi and get other people with the same story. Mike and Penny Moreau began flying back and forth from their home in New Orleans to Portland in the hopes that their continued dedication to finding their son and their complete openness to the police would help bring Tim home. They spent thousands of dollars going back and forth, and they were willing to do anything for Tim, including talking to the newspaper. That's when they were introduced to Jim Redden. Jim had already put in so many hours writing about Larry and interviewing those that knew him, so he was just the guy they were looking for. They were interested in working with a reporter to keep Tim's name in the papers to better their chances of locating him. For nearly 10 years, Tim's parents worked tirelessly to keep the search for him alive and to keep people interested in his story. They traveled the U.S. visiting the Northwest, the District Attorney's Office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and even the FBI. And yet, for 10 years, Larry kept on living his life. Despite many individuals who were fully convinced that Larry had something to do with Tim's disappearance and likely his death, nothing happened. Tim's body was never found. There was no crime scene. There was no evidence, just a bunch of hearsay and rumors. Rumors that this isn't the first time Larry was involved in a kidnapping of an employee. Rumors that Larry was involved in a prostitution ring. Rumors that Larry was involved in a drug ring. Rumors that he had killed Tim to keep him quiet about his counterfeit tickets. But of course, rumors are rumors, and no arrests were ever made, and Tim remained just another missing person.
And now a brief word from our sponsors. And if you find these ads annoying, you could just sign up for Patreon and not have to listen to any of them.
If there's one thing I've learned as an adult, it's that life can be hard. Whether you're dealing with stress and anxiety, trauma, or mourning the loss of a loved one, it could be helpful to talk to someone about what's going on in your life.
Going to a doctor's office to meet with someone weekly can disrupt your schedule and can be so expensive. Why not make a choice to try something convenient and affordable? Try BetterHelp.
With BetterHelp, you can get help on your own time and at your own pace. Scheduling a session with your counselor is easy and can be done via chat, text, phone, or even a video session to talk face-to-face.
BetterHelp has over 3,000 counselors who are licensed professionals with expertise in multiple topics. You can select what matters to you and be matched up with a counselor that fits your needs.
Listen, we all have something we're going through, so why not get started with BetterHelp today? To make it even more affordable, Murder in the Rain listeners get 10% off their first month with discount code RAIN.
Go to betterhelp.com/rain to fill out a questionnaire to help you get matched with a counselor that you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/rain, RAIN. BetterHelp, because you deserve to be happy.
And they pushed pretty hard to keep this going, right? I think you even said in one of your articles, it's thanks to them that they kept this alive.
Well, remember the body has never been found.
Right.
It's still never been located.
Mm-hmm.
It took 10 years before Larry was finally arrested and charged with a crime. And in that time, they made numerous trips from New Orleans to Portland to keep in touch with the police, district attorney's office. They lobbied U.S. attorney's office.
Wow.
They went back to Washington, D.C. and talked to the FBI. Just did everything they could think of to try to keep the story alive. The problem was, even though the police believed Tim was dead and that Larry was involved, there was absolutely no evidence of a murder. There was no evidence of the crime.
Mm-hmm.
There was no body. There was no crime scene. There was this final meeting in Starry Night, but there was no physical evidence that he was actually killed there, although he was. And so the police really
Had nothing
stymied.
yeah.
There were people who knew what had happened. There were people involved in Starry Night and Larry's circle that were actually part of the plotting to kill Moreau. There was George Castagnolia, the sound man, who participated in the murder. There were people who, kind of heard secondhand from the inner circle about what had happened, and none of them went to the police. None of them talked for 10 years.
By 1991, Jim had published multiple stories about Larry and his rumored dark deeds, but one in particular, called Missing and Presumed Dead, painted Larry in the most unbecoming light. In this article, Jim outlined that Tim had been missing for about 3 months, he was likely dead, and that police assumed that Larry had done it. In May of that year, Larry decides it's high time that he sues Jim and the Willamette Week. He's seeking $5 million in damages for soiling his good name. Good name. That's in quotes. What were the damages? All right, so there's the lack of sleep, the anxiety, his low self-esteem, his loss of respect and his reputation, loss of his business opportunities, and the profits they would have brought him. Willamette Week decides they're going to fight this. They have plenty of research and interviews to support all of the claims that they made in the articles published. Legal negotiation after negotiation, the Willamette Week and Jim decide there was one small correction that they could print that might appease Larry. Larry and his legal team agree that if they print the clarification, they're going to drop the lawsuit. So they print it, and then he sues them.
What a turd.
I know, right? Now, one of the big benefits of having this legal lawsuit is that Larry is now put in a corner and he is forced to disclose all of his financials. And these prove to be very interesting. In fact, so interesting that the IRS is starting to gain interest as well. Larry has claimed to make little to no profit at the Starry Night, such a little profit, in fact, that he would not have been able to afford his rent at his fancy apartment or the lavish gifts that he would bestow on his girlfriend that plenty of witnesses can account for.
So what a dummy, setting himself up for this.
I know. It's like he's so mad he wants to sue and doesn't realize he just gave everyone all the ammunition they need.
Now, we were pretty confident that we were going to be able to get this dismissed. Unlike Richard Allen Ness, when we published the story, we did hear from Larry and his attorney, and they were demanding retractions, and they were demanding corrections. They were demanding that we take back the accusations. We said, no, we're not going to retract anything. And we negotiated back and forth. And, we agreed that there was one part of the story that needed to be clarified. The counterfeit tickets that were found at the door were printed on genuine or something very close to genuine Ticketmaster ticket stock.
Okay.
And only a few slight differences, but it was really, really very much the same stock. And Larry had requested blank Ticketmaster stock from the Ticketmaster company sometime before then. He said he was going to use it for in-house promotions, but nobody really kind of knew what had happened to it. And the Ticketmaster stock that he requested and received had, even though it was blank on the front, it still had the boxes where you put the names of the bands and stuff.
Right.
On the back, it had a certain advertisement, like a Domino's pizza ad or something like that, 2 peaches for 1 or whatever, because they always had an ad on the back. The counterfeit tickets that were seized at the door had the same ad on the back. So in my story, I originally wrote that the counterfeit tickets were printed on the stock that Hurwitz had been given. They came back as part of this back and forth and said, well, you can't prove that the tickets are printed on the same stock that I was given.
So can you just add a
And
I
said,
think?
yeah. Well, and I said I had to admit that's right. I mean, I believed it was the same stock, but it's right. I shouldn't have said the same stock. So we ran a clarification
Okay.
that said it was printed on stock that was produced at the same time as the stock that Hurwitz was given. I think everybody that read that knew
what you were
it was the same stock.
Lines there.
But so we agreed to run that clarification if he would agree not to sue us. And, went back and forth on negotiations, lawyer to lawyer. Mm-hmm. And he agreed that they would not sue us if we ran the clarification. We ran the clarification. He sued us anyway.
Of course.
So our primary line of defense, first line of defense is this lawsuit should be dismissed because he promised not to sue us. But in order to get there, we needed to go through discovery, which were the depositions where his attorneys were able to question me about how I did my story.
Okay.
And then our attorneys were able to question him about everything we could think of under the sun.
You're like, let me get my list.
Yes, well, he claimed financial losses, and so we were able to demand financial records,
which is huge.
Prove what your finances were that were harmed, and that is when we discovered he had not actually filed income taxes, either personal or business income taxes, for 4 years. That he filed all 4 years at once, right before he turned them over to us, and we were entitled to get them. And so he had to turn them over to us. And when we got the returns, we realized that they were bogus. That mm-hmm. This can't possibly be what the real income was in those years.
Like he was not making enough money for where he was living rent-wise. Right?
Okay, here we go. For example, in 1987, he claimed that Starry Night only made a profit of $5,181 for the entire year.
Lucrative.
And that his income for that year, personal income for that year, was $5,181. He's saying that his income is Starry Night's profit, but it's only $5,181. Well, that's not enough money mm-hmm. to live on, especially the lifestyle that we knew he had. He lived in nice apartments. He had nice clothes. Mm-hmm. He was buying his girlfriend nice gifts. We knew that he was spending a lot more money than that, but we couldn't prove it.
So what does a bunch of bogus income have to do with avenging Tim's death? We'll get there, I promise. The judge ultimately throws out the case and agrees with Jim and the Willamette Week and drops the lawsuit. And that's because they had agreed to drop the lawsuit if they printed the article, which they did. So he dropped it. With the lawsuit squashed, Jim can now resume his articles about Larry and all of his dirty business practices. And around this time, Larry just so happens to leave town and moves to Vietnam to continue his career.
Convenient.
So with Jim's articles and the lawsuit hitting the public, Larry's complete lies regarding his income are now public interest. This is all happening quietly while Larry goes on to live his bougie life in Vietnam, continuing his music career. And I'm not kidding you when I say he planned a concert for Sting in Ho Chi Minh, and there was an E! Entertainment special about it.
Oh my gosh.
All while everyone knew he was a murderer and a fraud and had hidden all this money from the government.
I bet Sting didn't know. Sting wouldn't have gone with it.
I'm sure you're right. While Larry is busy being besties with Sting, the IRS is able to learn some very interesting things about him. Specifically, that he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars buying silver. And I'm sure that was all with his meager Starry Night income, right? Well, they have plenty of dirt on him, so they get his passport canceled, which eventually gets him deported by Asia, and he's indicted on tax fraud. So apparently, Lion Larry had hid more than $420,000 from the IRS in the years of 1987 to 1990. Larry would be sentenced to prison, and rather than giving him the expected 10 months based on the discussed plea agreement, the judge actually gave him 12 months and an additional 3 years of supervised probation once he gets out. So with Larry doing his time for the IRS fraud, people who knew the details about Tim's murder now felt comfortable coming forward and sharing that information. Despite those who were dazzled by Larry, there were many more who feared him. With Larry behind bars, they now could share what they knew, and there was a lot to share. Now, finally, the police could proceed with arrests in Tim's murder.
Once he entered prison, then the people that knew about the murder started coming forward with what they knew. And then things started happening pretty quickly. The police really stepped up their investigation. They were able to get specific information on George Castagnola's role in the murder.
Police arrested George Castagnolia, the sound engineer for the Starry Night. He was not only present the night Tim was murdered, he had helped murder him. As part of agreeing to his guilty plea, he would be sentenced to 10 years, and he would also be required to testify against Larry. And Georgie boy was ready to spill the tea. Here's a quote from George's plea. "I plead guilty to the aiding and abetting, in plain English, helping Larry Hurwitz in causing the death of Timothy Douglas Moreau, including disposing of the body of Timothy Douglas Moreau." He and others went on to share that there were other people involved, including Larry's former father-in-law. He was apparently contacted by Larry to help dispose of Tim's body after he killed him. Their discussion led to his father-in-law lending Larry and George a Cadillac to drive over the Columbia River into Washington where they could bury Tim's body. Looking back to that night in 1990, the day before Tim's murder, George had actually been pulled over in Hood River. That's a town right along the Columbia River on the Oregon side, but really close to a bridge over to Washington. So George actually ends up getting arrested because he had owed so much child support. So that night, Larry had to bail him out of jail. And of course, he obviously needed him for his plans to kill Tim. And it comes out later in court that the reason George was over there is he had been digging a grave. Then George details how after he was bailed out, he showed Larry how to use a garrote. A garrote is typically a cord or rope with handles which can be used as a ligature for strangulation. In this case, they used one made out of a broom handle and speaker wire. The next day, he was with Larry when Larry lured Tim to the Starry Night to talk about the counterfeit ticket scam. George claims that he jumped out of the office to distract Tim, and Larry moved behind him to strangle him to death. According to George, Tim's face turned red and he began making gurgling noises, and then he and Larry crashed to the floor. That's when George stepped in and held Tim down while he struggled before eventually passing out. He then went and got duct tape from his office and wrapped Tim's head fully in duct tape from chin to forehead, like a mummy.
And that's probably more how he even died, too.
Yeah, he suffocated.
Ugh.
He and Larry loaded Tim's lifeless body into the trunk of the Cadillac and drove into Washington, where they buried him near the river. They had what they needed. With George's testimony and conviction, they were able to move on to Larry. So now it's Larry's turn, and he has quite the decision to make. Prosecution has witness testimony from several people. They have a ton of circumstantial evidence. They can prove motive, but there is no body, and many of the witnesses have super shady backgrounds. So it's kind of a toss-up. Like, could I win? Should I not? Eventually, he did decide to make a deal. He pleads no contest for the murder of Tim Moreau in order to cover up the counterfeit ticket scam. And he had actually, in part of that, would have to help say where Tim's body was, but they never could find it.
George cut a deal for a reduced sentence. He agreed to say what he knew. He admitted it, and he implicated Larry in the murder. And then Larry was indicted and arrested. And all that happened in just a matter of months.
Right.
And then it took a little bit longer. It took maybe a year or so before that finally went to trial. But it did.
Right.
And once
And
again,
he took a plea, though, right? I mean,
he
it's an interesting case because there was no body found.
still no body found.
Yeah.
And the witnesses are not very reputable. I mean, George Castagnolia is admitted to helping kill somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The other people that Larry knows and are part of this have kind of shady backgrounds or dubious backgrounds themselves. There's nobody. The district attorney was nervous about trying to go to trial. Now, people do get convicted when there's nobody, but it's
harder.
It's harder.
Mm-hmm.
And so they consulted with the district attorney, talked with Tim's parents, Mike and Penny Moreau, who agreed to the reduced sentence if Larry would help find Tim's body, because they really wanted the closure. Larry was not able to find Tim's body.
Do you think that's because he didn't dispose of his body?
That's a very interesting question. George said that before they killed Tim, they went over to the Washington side of the Columbia Gorge and dug a grave. And then when they killed him, they put him in the trunk of a car belonging to Harvey Freeman, the former guru and ex-father-in-law, and drove to the site and buried the body there. When it came time for Larry to help find the body, they went to the site, but it was greatly changed because the very large Skamania Lodge tourist destination had been built on that site, and the landscape was totally different. And Larry says he could not, search and search and search, but could not find the body.
Could
now, I don't know whether that is really and truly where the body was buried. It really could be anywhere. I think that by not finding the body and by pleading no contest rather than guilty, Larry was kind of creating a certain level of deniability down the road. He could say, well,
I didn't do it.
I didn't really do it.
I didn't even know where he was.
George did it, and he didn't tell me he was going to do it. And
that's very
blah, blah, blah.
frustrating.
So, but I don't know. It's possible that that's really and truly where the body was buried. The parents would like to believe that because it's a beautiful natural setting, and Tim loved the outdoors. I'm not 100% convinced, but I don't know where else it might be.
Sure. So he ended up going to 11, 12 years was his sentence?
Well, he was sentenced to 10 or 11 years, and he served 8. He got out early on for good behavior.
I have such a hard time with that. There's no body, and he got out in 8 years.
8 years.
How do you feel about that as someone who's been very close to this along the years?
I understand the district attorney's reasoning, and I respect the family's decision.
Right.
Obviously that is not much of a sentence for what was a, deliberate and aggravated murder, but I understand that getting any kind of an actual conviction, and a no contest plea is a conviction.
Right.
So that getting any kind of a conviction is better than losing it at trial.
Fast forward back to today, and Larry Hurwitz really hasn't changed much. He was released from prison in 2008, and at that time, he's placed under post-release supervision, meaning there are some requirements he's supposed to follow. Don't travel without permission. You cannot go into certain states like California. You have to wear a GPS monitoring device. You need to do community service, regular stuff. And after wearing that monitor for quite some time, it was finally removed in late 2018, early 2019. But he was still supposed to follow those rules. On June 27th, 2019, Larry was cruising the streets of Huntington Beach in Southern California, cell phone in hand and transition lenses shielding his eyes. Then, an unexpected travel guest joins him and his companion. He's pulled over because, it's 2019 and you need a Bluetooth. Talking on your cell phone is a pretty routine traffic violation, but then officers notice a few strange happenings. Firstly, according to the arrest report, Hurwitz was noted as acting very nervous. And then the officer not only smelled marijuana, but he found a grocery bag full of money just sitting in the back seat of the car.
Is that a crime?
I mean, I like to keep
I
my
do
money
it.
there too. So upon searching the car, another bag of money is located and also drugs. So all in all, the police seized over $300,000
This
and
guy.
4.5 pounds of cocaine. All
At
in the
least he
car.
learned his lessons.
So Larry's pretty much screwed because at this time he is on, technically parole for murder. And not only is he busted in California facing major anti-drug trafficking laws, he's also going to be facing the music in Oregon.
Fantastic.
Both passengers are claiming that it's not their cocaine. Obviously.
It's not mine.
So they're not necessarily like pointing fingers at each other, but they're saying, I don't know who it belongs to. But Larry does say that the money is his. This is his money that he had pulled out of an account to invest in a music business in California.
Mm-hmm.
Locating this money could be a good thing. You see, in 2000, Mike and Penny Moreau had filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Larry Hurwitz. And because of this, he owes them $3 million. And over the past 11 years, he's been having to make payments to them. But of course, it's like $200 4 times a year.
Right.
So he's paid them nothing. And if it turns out this money is actually legitimately his, it will be turned over to them.
That's great.
After he pled no contest to killing Moreau, Tim's parents sued him in civil court for wrongful death.
Mm-hmm.
And he settled that by admitting that he had killed Tim and agreeing to pay them $3 million in compensation for the death. And he's not paid them much of anything. He has only been making very small quarterly payments of $225. And so if he's really and truly has had all that money all this time, he owes it to the parents.
Mm-hmm.
He shouldn't have had it. He shouldn't have been living on it. He owed it to the parents. Now, the police in California don't believe that it's money from a Merrill Lynch account. They think it's drug profits, and they've seized the money. Tim's parents did get a judgment in Multnomah County Court that they're entitled to $3 million. They have filed that judgment. They've done the paperwork in California in Orange County Superior Court, which is hearing the case, that they're entitled to the money.
Oh, that drug money?
And so, well, if at some point the authorities down there decide to return the money to Larry, it will not go to Larry.
It will go to them.
It will go to the parents.
That's great. Larry is facing 15 years for drug crimes in California, and he'll have to come back to Multnomah County for his post-release supervision violation. So it's highly likely he's going to accept a plea in California. But of course, the hearing was delayed, and we're airing this in January, so we'll probably know something by then. So we'll post it on a blog or let you guys, I'll do an update in the blog. This case is riddled with mystery and money and music and fame, and it truly is a page turner. But when you peel back everything, what you end up with is a tale of one man's greed and a murder he committed to cover up that greed.
What's really, at the heart of this entire case, this is, in many ways, this is kind of an exotic case. This is, it's in the rock and roll scene of the 1980s. Where there were a lot of drugs in the clubs. It's the beginning of the grunge scene that Portland played a really big role in. There are very colorful characters. Larry himself, being someone who hitchhiked across the country at a young age, interested in music, worked, he says, for Bill Graham down in San Francisco.
Lived on a
commune with a guru who was his father-in-law at that time. They had a falling out, reconciliation. There are a lot of, really exotic features to this story, but the bottom line is it's really just a murder for money.
Yeah.
That it's really just
save his own
about
ass.
a guy who was very greedy. He had a very successful club. I'm sure that it was making him a lot of money legitimately, and it wasn't enough, and he wanted more, and he cooked up this counterfeit ticket scheme. And then when it came out and his income was threatened, he wanted somebody to take the fall. And when they didn't work, then he killed this person, Tim, to protect himself from people finding out the truth. So the bottom line really and truly is, as exotic as it sounds, and as long as it took to get to the bottom of it, it really is a murder about money, and it's all about greed.
Yeah. I pretty much had a roller coaster of emotions when I was researching this. It's kind of like a movie. Like, there are high points and low points, and you're mad and you're sad. And one thing I read actually made me cry, and I was telling Jim Redden when we did the interview. There was this article he had written about how they finally were going to put this guy in jail, and Mike, Tim's dad, had flown in from New Orleans to go to that sentencing. And he had a bag of little mini Tabasco bottles that he gave out to the detectives and to Jim and everyone. And he said something like, "Thanks for not taking the heat off." And it just kind of got to me, like, it's expected for parents to not want to give up on their kids, but like, so many people felt the same way.
Right. It sounds like this guy was just trash and affected a lot of different aspects of the city. So it's no wonder that it's like, I'm sure the drug cops and the homicide cops and the
Then there's so much more to it, like things I didn't cover because there's just so much to be said. He's suspected of bombing a restaurant in Portland.
That's wild.
And they have him on so many other things, they never pursued it. But this guy was like meddling with businesses. He was kind of scary. People were worried he might hurt them.
Where is the movie on this guy?
I'm telling you, we need one. I think it would be really good. And I just picture him in like, Jim was telling us, it was very like Miami Vice, and he was like
totally
into that in the
that.
80s.
White
like
collars,
the pale pink
pastels.
jacket.
Yeah, just gross.
I remember my dad in the 80s had these like loose pants that had these crazy designs, and everyone thought they were so cool. And
like
I just picture
hammer pants?
No, but they were like loose, kind of like that. But I just imagine that with like a blazer and a mullet, and this guy's got just the creepiest mustache.
Oh God.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn about this case. And if you are interested in learning more about it, Jim has published all of his chapters online. So I think there's 28 in total. We will have a link on our blog so that you can go read them. I really think they're good. I think everyone will find them very interesting. This guy has like connections to a not a cult, but I mean a commune that was kind of culty. And the father-in-law he had was the leader of it. So I mean, there's just so much to learn.
Surrounded in
absolutely
shadiness.
So immerse yourself in the 80s, read these articles.
And good for Jim for going after this guy. He's not only dangerous sounding before you even go into it, but
he wasn't
the fact
scared
that he's threatening lawsuits and all of that. And it's like, I don't care.
I was very interested to talk to Jim about his interactions with this guy. And he said he was very into himself, and like he loved talking about him, and that got him into trouble.
Right.
He was just so willing to go to bat and go to fight that he would give everyone everything they needed to put him behind bars.
Classic.
I love it.
Up there is so much room where babies burp and flowers bloom. Everyone dreams, I can dream too. Up there, up where the skies are ocean blue, I could be safe and live without a care.
But man, that song was so good.
It still is good.
From Drumline, man.
I don't know that song. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, we'll play it for you in a bit, and you're gonna love it.
You guys brought your instruments?
Yes.
No, I mean
ready?
like on YouTube.
Ba, 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 ba.
Halftime is game time.
Are you ready?
What does that mean?
From Drumline.
Oh,
You're
I don't
quoting Drumline?
I don't actually know the movie.
We're so sorry we set you up for that.
I watched the movie one time, and all I did was make out with my boyfriend.
I don't know if I've ever seen it, but that tagline just stuck with me because it's
act
not
locally,
true.
think globally.
That's right.
We need t-shirts.
Can I say something about Ramblin' Rod?
Yes, you may.
I went twice. Once for my birthday, once for funsies, because I loved Ramblin' Rod.
Yep.
And I won Best Smile.
I believe you may have told us this on an earlier recording.
Well, because it's a highlight of my life. That would be my Jeopardy story.
I was scared of him And when he got to me to smile, I didn't want to because I was missing my front teeth. Anyway.
That would have been cute, though.
It would have, but it was not what I expected. He smelled like cigarettes.
Yeah.
I didn't get to see a single cartoon. While still a staple of the Portland music scene, I'm not even fucking up, you little assholes.
Henry, you're a fucking shithead.
The Starry Night Club. Oh my God. This case is never going to end.
The history of
I think I heard something before that, so we'll just start again.
Sorry. I didn't know you were going to start right there. I'm so sorry.
After nearly a decade of business, the club was Nope, now I'm going to screw up after 5 takes. In the course of interviewing musicians, employees, club onies.
You're good, Em. Very impressive.
You're good at seeing
just
stuff.
on site. The plastic part.
Well, there are
Wow.
other clues. There's a tree, lots of ornaments.
Just
and I
take
may
the
have
compliment,
thought
Em.
that-
Just take the compliment. Just take it.
We get it. You're a detective.
Carol Christmas. At your service.
You should write that down. That's a good idea. Scripted podcast. Write that down, Alicia.
Quit waving your finger at me. I ain't writing down shit.
While it was known that the capacity of the venue was about 11...
He's right down there.
You're ruining everything.
Gator claw. Don't let him get my gator claw. Hey, hey.
Scratches my back.
You leave alone my gator claw back scratcher. I get scratches on my back.
Well, I gotta tell you, he's going after that plastic thing. I won't be mad at you if you pick it up off the ground.
I
There
got
you
it.
Okay.
Well, I do have to say though,
Is he back at the
he's
thing?
back at my little. He's just grab this. Just take it off the ground. We're having a hard time here. There we go. Thank you.
The I gotta say is killing me.
It's a family heirloom.
So you store it on the floor?
It's a back scratcher.
Yeah. It's just a shellacked gator paw. It's not an heirloom. I just like it a lot. It does the best scratches of any back scratcher they've ever had.
Even a human back scratcher?
Yes.
You mean a hand?
They were interested in working with a reporter to keep
Tim's name?
I just like every time blur Tim's with the next word and make a new word. Tick. Nim.
Nims.
Rumors that Larry was involved in a drug ring. Cell phone in hand and Oh man, that's such a good line, you little shit. Come here, man. What is wrong with you? You want to go to the pound? You want a new family? I thought you liked me. On June 27th, 2019, Jerry? Who the fuck's Jerry? On June 27th, 2019, Larry was cruising the streets of Huntington. I feel shame. Talking on your cell phone is a pretty routine traffic violation, but when the officers notice a few... Nope. Go have some water. What are you doing?
This is the craziest Dr. Doolittle bullshit. Yeah.
Murder in the Rain is produced and edited by Josh McCullough. Written and hosted by Emily Rowney and Alicia Holland. Artwork by Jamie Costa. Music by Kai Pfeiffer at kyfifer.com. Check out our website, murderintherain.com, for additional information on all cases, a fun interactive map, and be sure to subscribe so you can receive our newsletter. Check out the Mad Props page for coupon codes from some of our sponsors. We love your reviews and seeing them on all streaming platforms, especially iTunes. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And suck my balls.
Please put that in.
The Murder in the Rain team would like to give a special shout out and thank you to our following Patreon supporters: JJ from the Dalles, Oregon, Jessica Bozeman from Texas, and Francis Wilson all the way in Australia. Thank you so much, you guys. And if you would like to hear your name on the show, please check out our Patreon and become a supporter.
Yeah. Check out what we're listening to this week.
My name is Sarah Turney, and you might have heard of my sister Alyssa's story before.
Be there at the deathbed, sir, and I'll give you all the honest answers you want to hear. Why don't you give them to me now? Because you got them now.
But I promise that you've never heard it like this. On Voices for Justice, I'm going to dive deep into Alyssa's case like never before.
Dad! Dad's a pervert!
I'm going to interview people you've never heard from, and I'm going to expose more about the police, my family, and myself than ever before.
I'm not asking you to move forward on it. I'm asking you to acknowledge that he wasn't briefed on the case, which you're not going to do, and I understand, but he wasn't. He said that he was aware that there were no sexual allegations, which is completely crazy to me because there's over 25 people in your documents that allege this. So when he says that, I don't know what he's talking about.
I've held back a lot for a long time, and I'm ready to release it on my own terms. The police told me that my best chance is media exposure, and I've been working for years to amplify my voice through others. But now, I'm ready to make some noise. Subscribe to Voices for Justice today on iTunes and most podcast players.
Allegations of